Good morning, and thank you all for joining our webinar. Chris and Scott are going to share information that is valuable regardless of the platforms you are running. Wisconsin's Educational Technology Leaders, WEDL, will be hosting a series of trainings on incident planning and management that will start sometime this fall. Please keep an eye out for those messages. All right, Chris, I think we're ready to get started.
Thank you, Annette. Welcome, everyone. First of all, let's go through the agenda and what we're going to talk about today. The first thing that we're going to talk about is some tips that you can pass on to your teachers, perhaps students, but teachers and administration for sure, which will be helpful in their approach to how they manage their work this summer and the fall and who knows how long, because there's going to be obviously a period of time where they're going to be working and teaching from home. So what we want to do is give you something to pass on to them. The next thing that we'll be talking about is video conferencing safeguards. So in the news, we saw plenty of noise about Zoom bombing and the like. And no matter what platform you're on, you need to check out some of the advice that's being given so that you have a approach that is best for your platform. So we're going to cover some for Teams. We're going to cover some for Zoom, and we're going to cover some for everybody's favorite platform, Google Meet. So following that, what we're going to show is identity management principles. This is going to be relevant for those of you using Active Directory, those of you that are using Google, and those of you that might be using Azure Active Directory as well. And it's really going to be about how in this time of mobility that things are really very important for a identity management strategy, because no matter where people work, the one constant, their device may change, their location and network may change, their identity is going to be constant. We've got some updates on and suggestions on how you best patch. And then last but not least, we'll cover a bit of the policies and procedures that are recommended around incident responses. So who are we and what do we do? So this next visual shows a little bit about Enabling Technologies customer base. We've been in business for 28 years. We've been doing business with K-12 organizations for about the last 15. We are a systems integrator and problem solver. Our specific expertise is around Active Directory and cloud software as a service, productivity tools, video conferencing systems and services, and the like. So our background is shared with these types of K-12s who have some situations where they need some outside assistance. I want to pause and not only thank those folks, but also those of you on the call from Wisconsin that help get by in these tremendously trying times. I have several friends in the K-12 arena, several customers that we know are really in limbo, and the flexibility, the patience that you all are having to show right now, the creative solutions that you're having to come up with to support completely new systems like temperature readers and safety monitors and the like. It's just incredible what you're having to do right now. So on behalf of Annette and Enabling Technologies, thank you very much for joining us, because we know your time is extremely valuable and we'll try to make the most of it. So let's proceed with my colleague Scott Bickland, who's going to walk us through some tips on how to equip the teleworker.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Scott Vickland. I run the CIO Advisory Services practices here at Enabling, and have had the opportunity to work with a lot of organizations like yourselves who have had to really quickly pivot with the pandemic and support the remote teleworker. As you no doubt have experienced yourselves being IT leaders, prior to this, maybe supporting the home worker was not the top of your list of things to do. I know from my own experience, I was not prepared to have my team help people work from home on their home Wi-Fi or their home machines and all that sort of thing. But the situation we're in now, that does seem to kind of fall into our range of responsibilities. So your staff is all at home now. There's maybe questions about who's coming back to the office and for how long. You no doubt have difficulties sort of reaching out to the community and helping them, troubleshooting issues they might have. Many of them may be working on personal devices as opposed to district-provided devices. So you have a wide range of challenges facing you. The first one, and the most important one, of course, is what's your community doing at home that may compromise your network? And so, under safe surfing, we're looking here at the most common attack vectors that we see in the marketplace. And the first four are really ones that we don't have a lot of control over as IT pros or security professionals. These are things that our users at home or at the office can do on their own. We can create policies around them, but we can't control their behavior. We can set password policies and require our users to have longer passwords, more complicated passwords, but we can't keep them from using that same password over and over in different places. We can't keep them from clicking on email when they're at home or at the office. We can't keep them from clicking on clickbait on malicious sites or downloading software that may attack their machines. All we can really do is encourage good behavior, less risky behavior, provide job tips and training and continuous messaging about good, safe behavior. On the defenses around safe surfing, really, if we have multi-factor authentication and good behavior around phishing, we really defeat most of the challenges that we're facing in securing our teleworking community. Obviously, hard to guess passwords are important. Super long passwords are even better, where you can come up with phrases with spaces. Again, reminding people not to use passwords again and again across multiple platforms. You may be more or less secure on your district environment, but if another environment that your teleworker is working on gets hacked and they have that password available to them, they can make use of it. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the phishing attempts, passing messages to our teleworkers about trust, scanning files, keeping software up to date, vigilance when installing software, making sure they're installing software that's reliable and safe, avoiding public or free Wi-Fi. Those are all useful tips to provide to our community. You have a wide range of training resources available through DPI. The InfoSec is a great way to find training resources that you can share with your community. I think it's important in this context. I mean, you guys have a much harder job than IT professionals in other areas, especially now, because in a certain sense, not only do you have to prep your staff and educators in your community, but in a certain sense, we need to rely on our educators who are having remote sessions with parents and students to also be aware enough of some of this content so they can pass those tips on to the home user as well. In your training, it's important to highlight risk. So I think it makes sense to share what the risks are, what the environment looks like, where the dangers are, just to heighten awareness of what the risks are amongst your user base, because I would say from experience, most people really don't think about this stuff on a regular basis, but by emphasizing to them how dangerous the environment can be, and then you hand them some job aids and training tips and that sort of thing, it helps with adoption. There is training that is specifically targeted to the home worker in the InfoSec IQ portfolio. They're nice, bite-sized, small pieces that you're not necessarily sitting there for an hour to consume some content, which I think is super helpful. And again, you're raising awareness, making them pause, for example, before they do something that just doesn't make sense and could end up leading to problems later on. It's important.
Yeah, let me jump in there, Scott, with a couple points here. It's Chris again, guys. The studies show that if a person has not been reminded to do something in between 30 to 90 days, then they'll forget. So it's important now to be very diligent to over communicate to them about the risks, specifically about the home worker environment. And so within your portal there, you should be able to find decent videos of between 3 to 10 minutes of working from home. There's even one called Working from Home for Educators, which would be ideal. So the more you remind them, even though you and I may think it's pretty basic information and sort of trivial, the more you remind them, the more diligent they will be in the next 30 to 90 days. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah. Just to underline that, what I typically did was I would send out like a weekly tip or trick that usually covered something around security, and then we would have a messaging around, specifically around phishing, since there's a lot of phishing activity going on, and it's a major threat. Encouraging your community, of course, to update their operating systems and third-party software is important. It's amazing the number of users in any community that actually never reboot their devices and apply those updates. So emphasizing that, I think, is super important. Phishing is probably the biggest risk to the organization. It's coming all of the time. At my last place, we were looking at hundreds of phishing attacks on our community each week, and even with a very small click rate at about between 1.5% and 2%, it's still dangerous because all you need is that one click. And I mean, you don't have to read too much news to see what's going on with that. So, emphasizing the importance of phishing attacks and how they can overcome those attacks, how they can recognize them, is essential to good security. There's some great content also on InfoSec that we would highly recommend as well. But basically what we're looking for here is we want to make sure that our community understands that they should hover over URLs to see if the URLs don't match what they're looking at. If there are spelling errors, it's amazing to me that this is the case, but I would say almost every phishing attack that I've seen, there is some kind of spelling error or grammatical error in the message. Email domains don't usually match where they're supposed to be, although they can appear as if they do match. Names may be varied. And essentially, what we tell our communities is they should trust nothing that requests a click. And then if you're really in doubt, if it looks like it may be something, you could always recommend that they go to the actual site associated with, say, a bank or Netflix or whatever it is. Check there, or even just make a telephone call. Other challenges that the teleworker is facing, the home internet is nowhere near as robust as it is in the office, and people will struggle with this, as I'm sure you've seen. And the contention for that network at home is extremely difficult. You may have kids on Netflix and World of Warcraft, a spouse or significant other also working from home, background noise which clutters up communications. And as I mentioned earlier, you aren't able to reach out into their facility or their home to give them direct support. So it creates a very frustrating environment for everybody. And not to mention distractions like dogs, delivery people, all resulting potentially in poor audio and video quality in these meetings. What we would recommend to our community is share content in advance rather than presenting during a session. We're going over a live event here, sharing some stuff with you. Limited bandwidth might make that not a helpful and pleasant experience, so perhaps sharing that in advance works. Finding ways to lower the bandwidth requirements of material that's going back and forth. For example, text versus photos or graphics or animation, while not as rich and satisfying, will help to reduce the amount of bandwidth, the bandwidth requirements that your teleworkers have. It's not particularly polite, but you know, with contention at home and a teleworker that has some sessions to conduct, perhaps ask folks to watch Netflix or play games at other times. And then helping them to understand whatever your presentation platform is, how to mute folks that are on calls and not presenting. Obviously, it doesn't encourage this feeling of collaboration, but it will increase the quality of the presentation for everybody. And then, of course, having headsets for everybody to use will no doubt improve the audio quality of the presentation. But if you are able to provide those as a resource to your community, it does make it easier to troubleshoot problems that come up if everybody is on the same headset. And then, of course, job aids and troubleshooting guides are an important part of all of this. And now, Chris, online video conferencing safeguards. Chris, you're on mute.
All right, Scott, let's get into Zoom, and then we'll get into Google Meet, and then Microsoft Teams for those of you that are headed in that direction. So here's a classic screenshot that swept the internet for a day or two. That was that the UK Prime Minister published his personal meeting identifier on social media. And so this really got exposure to how, if you're using these tools kind of in their default fashion, they will be a security hole and could allow anybody to jump in and join. So Zoom helps fix this, and it's important to note that on September 27th, all meetings must have a waiting room or a passcode enabled. That's for all paid accounts. So that isn't necessarily the case for your teachers or students are going to still be using Zoom free, which of course has I think a 45-minute meeting time limit. But meeting passcodes are already enforced for those free accounts. So they've shored all that up. But if you're using paid accounts, you can still get by with the old way until September 27th. At that point, you're going to have to use a passcode and enable either a passcode or a waiting room. So both are a good idea. Using a personal meeting ID gives everybody access to that meeting room at any time, and you may have lingerers going in there. What you want to do is create that passcode, which is unique every time, and then create a waiting room so that teachers can admit children as they go. Now, you're on a Microsoft Teams live meeting here, so let me give you just a moment's background on that because it's different. We did not have to admit everybody here. There was no waiting room. You're all just watching a stream of our presentation. And this is good for scalable meetings of up to 20,000 at a time. So a little bit different format than a classroom would be, certainly. But when you're using a Zoom, you'll definitely want to create a meeting room and use a passcode. And that's going to be, I think, a little different for teachers who want to use the same one all day long. So be advised that they'll have to make a change there and train accordingly. And then make sure that only the hosts can share their screen. That's also important. And I'll show you next some of the sort of screenshots of what Zoom looks like. So there's a build here, Scott. So go ahead and click through. The first is showing you that passcode that generate automatically, something that you want to click so that it allows you to create that passcode. Go ahead. And then the enable join before the host. Leave this off unless you want students to join, and only authenticated users can join is kind of a tricky one. So that one means that anyone who joins has to have a Zoom account. So if students aren't going to be given Zoom accounts, you want to leave that off. You can kind of see what the defaults are as of yesterday when I took this screenshot. And of course, I've practiced my own preaching with hiding my personal meeting ID. So one thing about the live meetings, guys, and I see some of you have figured it out already, there is a Q&A button in there, so you can all ask questions in the Q&A. If you hover over the top right of your browser, you can see there's a Q&A. Thank you to those that are already clicking and asking some questions. We will be getting to those very shortly. Let's go to the next one, which shows how the folks at Google, which I know you guys are using a ton of, are approaching the problem. So I think Google saw a square, they saw a nail and they used a sledgehammer because they're making changes to their tenants right now that will basically disallow users who are not signed into a Google account to join your meetings. They made this announcement and they quickly moved to enact it on the 13th of this month. They said it would take 2 weeks, so it may very well be done. They said by the 29th is when they would be done, so this is probably finished in your tenants. So you will see some tricky kind of behaviors here, we think, because if a student, say, tries to join a meeting that the teacher has set up, and the student's browser has multiple profiles in it and has been cached, and it maybe at the browser instance that they're starting comes from their parents or the student's personal Gmail, then they won't be able to get in that meeting. And that's going to have to be training that you all send down to them to say when, and you may have already had to do this last spring, but when doing this, they're going to have to create an incognito session or ensure in some way that and there's Google browser, Chrome browser profiles that can also accomplish this, but in some way, shape, or form, they're going to have to be associated with your CISA's, your district's accounts to be able to just natively click to join these meetings. Otherwise, they're going to be stumped. And also, if, say, a teacher gets invited to a meet of a colleague or a community member or whatever it is that they may do on Meet outside of their own meetings, and those aren't coming from a G Suite Enterprise or Education account, then they can't join those. So they're going to have to join via their kind of personal Google account at that point. So be advised on those two kind of quirks that you may experience along the way. If others want to comment in the Q&A window about things that they're aware of or that other of your colleagues here on Wisconsin's DPI call here today may need to know, feel free to add those and we'll shout those out in a minute. You still get live stream recordings and 250 meetings up through the 30th of September. And here's another sort of tip that comes from Google, and that's to only allow the OUs that have faculty and staff to create new video meetings. Your students probably shouldn't be creating those meetings and certainly shouldn't have access to the paid features like live streams and recordings and the like. And then they do have some other tips for distance learning that are posted there. When you see these slides, or just search for, I think the title of the article is Tips for Distance Learning. There's a few there. Let's talk about Microsoft Teams next. And Microsoft Teams is what we're using here to distribute this large call. You can use Teams in much smaller environments. Microsoft's even got some modules that are specifically built for K-12 where you can set up profiles for teams of students, teams that involve students and teachers, etc. So there's some headway that they're making here. They do have the same risks in some ways, and they all do, of people kind of joining anonymously. And so you do have to take some care when you're programming your policies, which I'll show in just a second, but these are some of the tips that Microsoft provides. You don't want to allow anonymous users to join a meeting. That is to say that if a student receives the invite and they flip the invite URL over to their evil twin who doesn't belong in that class, and they join, they're not invited or come from an account that's not authenticated, then they won't be able to be involved with that meeting. They also recommend that you use Lobby, much like Zoom. But unlike Zoom, Microsoft isn't forcing this like Zoom is. So you do have the ability as an administrator to configure these and put different people in different policies to be able to make these controls. There's a difference between a presenter and attendee, of course. If teachers are the only legit presenters, then there's a user setting that makes that so, as well as a default setting that administrator can make. Students can be promoted to presenters, of course, and then demoted to attendees if they do have something legit to share. Everybody always suggests mute all attendees. Obviously, in this type of meeting format on Teams live events, it's sort of automatic since what we're doing is streaming to you over your browser. But when you're in a real live meeting, that's always a good idea. And then Microsoft had an issue for a while where if you just hung up as a teacher, students could continue to IM each other. The way in which you avoid that risk is to have the teacher physically end the meeting. So there's a button next to the hang up button that would have otherwise just cut off their audio that ends the meeting entirely, and that closes off all IMs. If your district's going to use Teams, there's a very nice set of information that Marquette published about it. So the next slide shows some of the physical settings, and go ahead and click through here, Scott, as we show some of the settings. It's probably an eye chart, but there are ways in which you can allow transcription in your meetings. So you're likely here seeing a live caption. You also can transcribe that for students who missed the meeting or prefer to read, or for the teacher to capture what they said so eloquently and then have it written down. You can allow transcriptions in standard meetings. It's a setting that has to be on. Cloud recording, this is kind of a difference between Zoom and Teams. Microsoft only records in the cloud for compliance reasons. Zoom allows a local copy to be recorded instead. There's those content sharing controls, allow a participant to request control or allow an external participant to give a request control. You want to leave those, the second one, off. You may allow your internal participants to give a request control, but certainly people that are external to your domain shouldn't be. And there's on the bottom, there's the participants and guests. You want to leave anonymous people off that can start the meeting. Automatically admit people, this is where you want to check none if you are using the lobby to its fullest extent. And then enable live captions. That's again, the closed captioning that would be able to be watched by your viewers. Even in the real-time meetings, that's possible, not just meetings like this one. So what we want to do to kind of close this section is provide to you some user tips that I think you really should be passing on, because, man, if you're like my kids and dealing with teachers who are new to video conferencing and new to this model, there is so much to learn to be effective that they'll need to know. So we have 5 tips here. First of all, keep the meetings short, especially in primary, where the attention span of students is, epically low. You shouldn't be expecting them to sit and pay attention to anything, even morning meetings, let alone some sort of instruction for more than 45 minutes. It's ideal to keep those reasonably sized if you can. 28, 32 in a classroom is hard enough. To keep that many on a call is tough. So if your teachers and curriculum folks allow it, smaller groups to be better and focused with a specific goal in mind. And what is important there is the morning meeting has a far different goal than a lecture. And so if the goal of the call is just to build the community and, kind of explain what they should be doing for the day, that might be a casual call, but students need to know that the goal of a more structured, rigorous math lesson is just that. They need to be paying attention and acting differently. It's tough, it's a soft skill, but certainly something that will help the students respond to this environment. It's important to just monitor attention. You can't always expect a teacher to have a really hard-hitting, crisp question to make sure that students are with them, but they can at every point be asking attention-based questions like, hey, what did you think of what she just said? And you ask the student that is sort of faded away or is their eyeballs aren't on the screen, to keep them engaged. It's another soft skill and one that will be learned over time, but is certainly recommended to stay engaged. Break up those sessions with something that kids really like to do. Sitting in front of the computer is pretty mundane when they're used to doing it in front of their Minecraft and Fortnite. If you have the option in 2 teacher classrooms, have one monitor the students' behavior online while the other one does the teaching. And then last but not least, and I think for all situations and particularly those where you're dealing with secondary and high school teachers who are more used to more lecture format, there are tips you can give them to have them appear more like they are in front of the classroom. We've seen some teachers who have whiteboards and they have cameras trained on themselves on the whiteboard. They step back 6 to 8 feet so that on camera, they look like they're in more of a classroom setting. This is far different than when a teacher sits right on top of their camera with their nose hairs in the 1080. And that's another soft skill, but certainly something that will help, I think, the meetings and these online instructional sessions be more natural. And so a fair distance back, at least from your shoulders up, torso up ideally, and in those where they're up for it and they have the equipment and the wherewithal to move back from the camera a bit, they can do that. Just watch when you're doing that with Zoom backgrounds. Sometimes if you step too far back, your camera loses track of you and the only thing that will show up is your background. Same thing on Teams, which also has custom backgrounds. So hopefully that helps you pass on some information as we move to the next section, which is identity management. And so to be honest here, you're going to see a bunch of Microsoft isms here. And it's our understanding that most districts have Active Directory. And so some of the information that you'll see in this slide is really forward thinking. So what I want to make sure you're aware of is that your Active Directory being 20, 25 years old is not the end of the road for Microsoft. Even though you haven't used Office 365 or Azure services yet in every case, you do have access to something called Azure Active Directory, and Azure Active Directory provides to you cloud-based identity services, much like Okta, much like Ping Identity and the like. So if you're looking for a more new age method of, for instance, providing single sign-on to your third-party SaaS apps that you use, Azure Active Directory is an option for that. Most school districts have access to that at no charge, at least the Azure Active Directory basic features. And so as you're looking for solutions to modernize your identity management services, some of these tips here are very specific to that. No matter what you're doing, number one is critical, and that's to enable MFA. Even if a user is phished and they type in their identities to a bogus login site that looks just like the one they use to get into the school resources. If MFA is enabled, then the attacker is blocked. Meanwhile, the good guy is allowed in, well, as long as they have their device next to them. So we haven't seen this ubiquitous in schools as much as we have in commercial businesses. But you guys are at as much or more risk of identity compromise and credential theft. And so MFA is by not even a close margin, the number one thing that you can be doing. Azure Active Directory does have a service like that. I know Google does as well. So it kind of depends on where your hub of your identity is going to be and what you can do to best extend that to get some of these modern features. So the first two, 1.0, 1.1 are about you, the administrators, and then the end users. When you do go to Azure Active Directory, you get password protection features that basically hint at when a user creates a password that's weak. Now, you're going to wonder, okay, I have some standards already set in my Active Directory to require a quote unquote complex password, which is one capital letter and one symbol and one number, right? Well, if the system is set up as such and users type in things like capital S for spring 2020 exclamation point as their password for this past semester, and then they come in this fall and they put in fall 2020 exclamation point. Well, your requirements may be met, but it's still a weak password. And so what's this password protection type algorithm does is it looks for things that you or that the AI says, that's still weak, and prompts them to try again. There's other stuff here. The one big one on 1.4 that's kind of important is if you have legacy authentication enabled for POP3 or IMAP or the like that isn't using a modern authentication which supports things like MFA, those are a massive hole for attackers. And so keep your eyes peeled in your systems for any connectors to third-party systems that hang off of your email. And this can happen in Gmail as well. So look for ways in which you can shut down those existing non-modern protocols. As I wrap that up, I'll leave you with this. You don't have to move to Office 365 to get some of these Azure Active Directory features. You can simply extend your directory and use Azure AD as your identity management, and use Google as your productivity suite. So there's by no means a close tie that you have to start going all in with Microsoft to get some of these features to improve and modernize your directory. One warning, because this happens and happens when you use conditional access and or MFA for your own accounts. Be aware that you may lock, especially if the account that you're applying MFA to is the administrator account, you may lock yourself out, so be aware of that. And then I'm to wrap up with some information here about patching. And since, as I understand it, there's tons of Chromebooks out there for students. This particularly change your mindset, be thinking, okay, I do have staff using Windows computers, administrators using Windows computers. I won't touch on Mac, but I want to just give you guys some future thinking here of how the industry is moving to manage these thick desktops, if you will. So you used to run everything on-prem, and in the cloud, you're going to move to the types of services on the left. If you use WSUS or maybe System Center to manage your updates of your devices, Microsoft is pushing hard to start to leverage Intune. And the reason why is because it's a total cloud service. No matter where the machine is, it can alert Intune that it's out there, and Intune can say, okay, it's time to do your Windows 10 Spring 2020 update, which was Win 10 2004, some of you know. And that machine can take the update and you can control it no matter where it is. So the point here is the plumbing that you had in place for on-prem may not be meeting your needs, and to get there, you need to start looking at these more modern things on the right-hand side. Scott, the next slide has a bunch of builds, so just click it about 6 times until you see one that says Intune, and then we can stop there. Yeah, so this is kind of the Microsoft portfolio of options to use for updates. The ones on the left, probably the things that you've been using: Windows Update for Business, WSUS, maybe System Center, but it's really Intune that's the most modern, that has the most controls and reports. But the other good news here is it doesn't have an impact on your VPN. So if you're using Update for Business, which is a cloud service, Intune or Cloud Management Gateway, these machines don't hog your VPN when they need to take their updates. So that's a good thing. And that is the guidance for anything that you're using to manage your admins and staff's Windows machines, as we now transferred over to Scott for some discussions on policy, procedure, and specifically incident responses. Go ahead, Scott. Take it away. You may be muted, Scott.
Okay, there we go.
You got it.
I'm back. So yes, we have 3 areas of policies and procedures we'll be covering today, 1 in this session and 2 later on. And I just want to draw a distinction between policies and procedures. So the policy is, your intention, your goal, your philosophy on a particular topic. The procedures are how you specifically implement that policy in your organization. So we're going to be focusing on policies, since obviously we don't have key insights into how you might actually implement these things. But still, the policy, you can think of a policy, if it's promulgated in your district, it really becomes your license, potentially becomes your license to do the things that you want to do. There's usually a procedure that you have to go through to promulgate a policy, an approval, a workflow that you may have to go through. But once that policy is accepted and approved by the organization, it does give you the leverage that you need to do the things procedurally which implement the policy. So the first one we're going to talk about is incident response planning. And obviously, you know, as we've talked about, there's lots of threats on the horizon. There's been lots of news on attacks. Corporations, Garmin got hit over the weekend. But what you also see is lots of interest in the hacking community to go after what you might think of as soft targets. So these are nonprofits, educational institutions, places where hackers feel that perhaps there isn't the investment available to provide the defense that's needed to protect the platform. All you have to do is go out and look at, say, the Kaspersky site to see the rate of attacks. This is a cool animation at cybermapkaspersky.com. This one here at ThreatBut adds a little pew pew with each of the attacks, which makes it more fun for your children. But the point of it is just to see how much activity there is in terms of attacks on different settings. So the incident response life cycle. We're going to talk about planning the incident response, and so this is all about how we're going to go about organizing ourselves in the event that we've had some kind of incident, a breach, or whatever it is. So we've developed our plan. We're going to see what has happened. Somebody's going to report to us that there's been an incident and that requires our attention as the IT team. Almost immediately, we're going to do two things. One, obviously, we're going to begin containment, which can be shutting down systems, isolating systems, turning off connections and that sort of thing. Simultaneously, we're notifying the community because we need to let folks throughout the district and potentially the community going beyond school staff about the nature of the incident. Say, for example, compromise of private information. It may be necessary for us to reach out to the families of students. While that's all going on, of course, we're working on eradication of the threat, and we're going to work on recovery to bring our systems back up and make them available to the community. As a result of this, there's obviously going to be some lessons learned that we have. How well did we do responding to the incident? What kinds of things worked? What kinds of things didn't work? And then we're going to go and revise our plans to get ready for the next one. So this is just the life cycle of incident response. Oh, I think I missed a. I think there's a slide missing. Anyway, so what we're interested in here is how do we communicate with the folks in the community? So the first thing we're looking at is who's in charge of the incident response. So this could be the head of IT for the district. If you have a CISO or some other security officer, this could be the person who's organized. But the point isn't the title of the person, but who is going to be responsible. Because when it happens, people are going to be panicking. They don't know what to do next, and so we need to have a script for how to manage things when we're in this moment of crisis. So who's in charge of it? How is the IT group going to respond to the incident once it takes place? Who's going to be notified throughout the district, and who's going to be making decisions about what other notifications might need to be made outside of the IT team or school administration. Having the plan in place gives you an ability to follow through on this stuff, and be able to make the kinds of notifications that have to be done. We're giving you a couple of different resources here. First is the cybersecurity framework from NIST. It is fairly complicated, but it is a useful resource to see what kinds of materials perhaps you might be able to adopt in your work on incident response. And then the second one here is an actual incident response plan that taken from another educational institution that we've genericized so that you have something that you can work with, and it takes you through the process of identifying who are the key stakeholders that need to be notified in the event of an incident, what the responsibilities of each of these roles are. Obviously, they're all tailorable to fit however you are staffed in your district, and then what kinds of notifications you may need to make depending on the nature of the breach that you've experienced. Okay, Chris.
And thanks, Scott. And we like to close with a reminder that we're all in this for the end user experience. And as much as the good tech that we put in to help them, there's still an element of the 8th layer of the OSI model, which is the people layer, and that's going to be an important part of it. Specifically, as you go back to school and expect people to catch on to new techniques in a more formal way than they were in the spring when it was a little haphazard. I think the biggest thing to think about here is how you equip them, and we like to think of it in a crawl, walk, run fashion. Get them effective, but then later move them towards efficient. And working with your instructional learning people to help dig into the tips and tricks that we gave, for instance, around the video conferencing and some of the other work from home items that we provided at the front, is not just a one-person job, and it's probably a full-time job if you do it perfectly well. So again, we thank you for your dedication to your jobs and to your students and your districts for what you've done so far, and encourage you to use the net at the DPI and other resources that we're providing to help if need be, that you can make some movement towards this run phase ultimately later. So for summary, we talked today about making sure that you are sharing a reasonable amount of tips and tricks for your teleworker, your teachers, and perhaps even your learners. And this can't all be just, hey, don't click this. There's got to be some positive spin to it as well, and you've got to figure out the right blend. In some, there's got to be a multiple media approach there. You can have some live training if you're fortunate enough to do that the first week back or during your pre-session days with your teachers. You should be getting on that radar. You should be getting on your portals and your home pages and informing them of tips and tricks and ways in which they should work better, and also the risks that they're likely to face. And then, of course, there's always the old way of email, but that's the least efficient because people hardly read anything anymore, except what they're not supposed to click. Next, take all the precautions possible. As I mentioned, there are some very granular configuration options if you do happen to be using Zoom or Teams, especially. Google a little more coarse. Think about cloud identity models for the future. Some of the things that you ultimately need to do to protect your identities need cloud-based identity services, and your Active Directory on premises isn't equipped to do that. Think about if you deployed ADFS at any point, think about some of the things that it can do, but much, much easier. Patch and move to modern management, because it's difficult to expect everybody to have their PC on net every, all your admins and staff that are using Windows every month on Wednesday morning when you have the new patch to release. So think about ways in which you get those out in a reasonable way. And I didn't mention servers, but certainly you're probably running some Windows servers, and the same patch management principles and defense mechanisms apply there. And then last but not least, Scott went through some very good and relevant information on incident response plans, but your IRP cannot start perfectly, but don't let that pause your efforts to try to make incremental progress there, because the perfection will come in a far more mature stage. But if you have the basics in place, that will save you time, that will save you energy, that will meet the expectations of your commissioners and your boards, much more so than what might be the alternative, which would be a scramble. All right, folks, that wraps up this morning's session. So we have a 2 o'clock session that's going to go into a few other topics regarding securing the virtual and hybrid classroom. That one's going to discuss a lot more about networking and optimizing network security, as well as remote access. That one's also going to be discussing different policies, like a information security policy and the like. I'm also going to be discussing how you best protect devices in this process where things aren't necessarily safe behind your firewalls. So please feel free to join us back there at 2. We appreciate the questions and hope that we can continue to add some value here this afternoon. Thanks very much, folks. By the way, if Max is still on, Max, I'm going to repost and answer some advice from a colleague of yours to your question, and it is now there. One last question. I've got a few of them coming in here, actually. So an email of all the links. Yeah, we can do that. Scott, can you, he specifically is asking, it's Lee,
Yeah.
For the IRP. Can you go to that, hover and click, and then pop that in for Lee real quick? And then we will be sharing the recording and can also share the deck so that you get those. The only other question was one about is enabling on state of Wisconsin purchasing contracts. The answer is yes to that. We've done business with the universities and so are on those contracts. Thank you very much. All right, that should do it for now. Appreciate everyone's time and talk to you in a few hours.
Take care, y'all. So